When presented with the opportunity to join in a new journey, I gladly took it, because I love studying different games.
Nope, Monk, no audio. No audio from you.
Crap.
I hold on. Let's find out if there's audio from Sig when you introduce him. But I kind of doubt it. You should start fixing your audio.
You OBS. I think what ended up happening was whenever I do an update, whether OBS or a Windows update.
We love OBS Studio.
No, it's just you, Monk, that has no audio. The rest of us are still heard just fine.
Yeah. The default capture ends up being nothing because it goes straight to default instead of what I have it set whenever I update. But this is the Record of Swordforged Worlds, the unofficial Sword World podcast. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have 4 of my good brothers and sisters, making his appearance after a bit of aggressive persuasion, or enthusiastic persuasion, depending on how you want to look at it. Good brother Sig, who already did his intro. We have...
and again, when presented with the opportunity to, study a new game and explore a new world, I jumped on it.
Mm-hmm. We have the man losing arguments with himself, good brother Hydra.
Wow, Middle, you're actually paying attention this time.
We have our one of our resident gremlins and the person who has since graduated from sitting on my shoulder, good sister Maki.
Just don't eat half my food.
I don't know what she's typing.
Oh, hey.
There we go.
I am the resident diversity hire woman. I am Maki. I am sheep. Nice to meet you.
And the man of 1,000 rooms, the CEO of Zadari Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
Zadari Enterprises would like to remind you that any isekai instances you may experience are not the fault of Zadari Enterprises, and in fact, that truck did not have our logo on it. Shut up, legal! I already told you I'm going to shut you down the next time you try to interrupt me.
Well, that explains my last incident.
The Zadari Enterprises logo is on none of these isekai trucks. It is a rumor. People are making it up. We do not send people to other worlds. We just send them to death. I mean, Guinea.
You send them the Hiffle.
No. Hold on. I need to. Yes, I know 621 was ours. Shut up. They don't need to know that we started Rubicon. Anyway, we don't send people to other worlds. We just send people where they belong.
Mm-hmm. But with all that said, now when we did this 2 weeks ago, our focus was mostly on setting a tone and going over what Sword World is, as well as some of the adjacent things linked to that. For this particular episode, we are going to be diving headfirst into history, because Sword World has been a thing since 1989. It has been a thing for over 25 years. I'm fairly certain that there's going to be some big release on the 30th anniversary, because Japan really likes anniversaries that are multiples of 5, as I've stated in the past. I don't know how that started, it just is a thing. I don't even think it was intentional.
Fives and zeros are nice, even. I don't mean even as in even numbers, but they're nice even areas when it comes to a decimal system. So I'm guessing it's just having to do with that.
Mm-hmm. So I will note that when it comes to doing this particular history, and the reason I titled the video what I did, is because the history lesson we're going to be going over covers the pre-Sword World days, some of the history of Record of Lodoss War, the Sword World 2.0 and 2.5 days, as well as certain adjacent affairs. Now, when it came to the 1.0 era, I actually had to do some good old-fashioned journalism, because there's not a lot of public info. And a lot of info that is out there, I had to deal with language barriers. So, I do want to give a special thanks to Awkward for answering all my dumbass questions and providing me with several interview snippets over certain parts, as well as clarifying some assumptions that I did have. One of the things I was very quickly corrected on was this idea that D&D lost its footing. I've mentioned this elsewhere, but D&D in Japan, from what I was able to find, had a stop-and-start history. Where over the course of decades, it would be supported for a few years, and then nothing, and then right back to supporting it again. Which is why the D&D anime project that is currently in the works, I don't think is going to be as successful in bringing people into 5e as Wizard of the Coast probably wants. They have managed to piss people off by having that Japan-only version be the actual support for Karator, which folks like me have been asking about for years. So I was like, you don't do Karator because you're scared of the title Oriental Adventures, which whatever. But you're willing to do it for this. Fuck you, WotC. This will not be the last time I say fuck you, WotC.
WotC being WotC, a day that ends in Y.
Mm-hmm. Some people try to separate the bullshit of TSR from the bullshit of WotC. I don't. No matter what flavor of shit it is, it's still shit. But I'd like to start with the creation.
And on today's catchphrase of the week.
I really need to write out the lexicon thing on the Discord server, because there's so many. So we have. I didn't have lore years ago. What I had was a lexicon of catchphrases that just stuck within my work. So you could kind of say I was doing lore before VTubing even existed. And I was certainly doing Geek of the Week for that. But
There are a lot of things that were done very early on.
mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to... Before we even get to Sword World, we need to go back a few years beforehand. All the way back to the early 1980s. And I have to bring up one particular man. Hitoshi Yasuda.
Mm-hmm.
Yasuda got his start translating RPGs, both video game and tabletop, as well as translating game books and translating novels. Some of the novels that he translated, we do have a short list. So let me go over this list, and you can tell me how many familiar names you hear in this. Eden Philpotts, The Lavender Dragon. John Hersey, My Petition for More Space. Michael Moorcock, Elric of Menivene and the Black Corridor. Christopher Priest, The Inverted World. Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, Dragonlance. William H. Keith Jr., Battletech. DJ Hendrick, the Penhalgion trilogy. I'm pretty sure I mispronounced that. George R.R. Martin, Sand Kings. Richard A. Lupoff, The Triune Man. Terry Pratchett, The Color of Magic.
Ding.
So, this is somebody who had as much of a background in fantasy novels as he did in games.
So you're talking about the Penhaligon series, right?
Yeah. The italic threw me off with how the font was set up, but
Understand.
yeah, those are some big ass names.
Those are some very classic names. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And at the same time, he got into role playing not through D&D per se, but through Wizardry and Ultima, which as well as Traveler, which he was doing translation work for. Specifically, the CD-ROM version of Traveler.
But everybody now sees that, wait a minute, the mention of those games, those aren't tabletops.
Yeah.
Yes. They aren't tabletops.
Traveler.
Yep. The game where you can die during character creation.
The best part of the game. Watching someone roll a new character and they haven't yet finished their first.
But he was also responsible in translating game books. Now, as far as which game books, I wasn't able to specifically find that out, but there were quite a few. I don't think he was involved with any of the Japanese translations for, say, Lone Wolf or Bloodsword or Fighting Fantasy, but he was certainly in that umbrella. He was also involved in Gamebook Magazine, which came out in 1986, the same year that he would found a little group with some of his college buddies called Group SNE. But as much as he was a translator, he was a game writer and a novelist. In addition to that, was involved with Gamebook Magazine and handled the Japanese translation of Warlock Magazine, which I believe Warlock was actually an 80s Games Workshop project. It was a collab between them and Penguin Books, basically the magazine arm of Fighting Fantasy. So he probably did do some translations of the Fighting Fantasy books, which there's a lot of those. And Fighting Fantasy isn't my favorite game book series, that goes to Lone Wolf, but it's still pretty damn good. I'm more familiar with Advanced Fighting Fantasy, which was a full-on RPG.
Also, I'm probably the only person who thinks that their name is funny in the West. The name for the group.
Group S&E because the name is based on a syntax error?
No, it is. It's not based on a syntax error. SNE does mean syntax error in basic, like in actual basic.
Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know what basic is, go look up basic programming language.
But
I find it hilarious. Especially for a Japanese translation company.
Yeah. And of course, it's well known, Group S&E was formed under the Kadokawa umbrella because they wanted to tackle more stuff within the RPG market, which was starting to gain momentum by the time we get to the mid-80s. It was still extremely niche, but the potential was there. And a lot of the people within Group S&E already knew each other because a lot of them were graduates from Kyoto University.
Yep.
Which isn't too much of a surprise. It's not uncommon for a lot of people who got into role-playing games in the 80s to do so through college or university circles. In fact, I find it kind of refreshing that that's something that is applicable for both sides of the Pacific. And with now, as that ends up happening, Sword World eventually gets its first taster, but not in terms of the RPG book itself, but rather through replays. Specifically, what was supposed to be a one-off replay that had rules that were meant to be very simple. That replay was Thieves' Rhapsody, which would later become the first part of the Devil May Care Adventurers trilogy. When the replays of that party were made into a kind of omnibus.
Yep.
And fortunately, the Thieves' Rhapsody books have been fan translated. But they are essentially the earliest replays for what would become Sword World. It wasn't called that yet, and I think the idea of it being a Sword World replay collection was retroactive. So when it showed up in Dragon Magazine, no, not the Dragon Magazine you're thinking of. This is a different one. A lot of the rule sets and early exposures was through the magazines, not through its own book. That wouldn't happen for a little while. And
hobby magazines were really going into their prime right around then too.
Because we're still in around 1986.
Yeah, and so hobby magazines were starting to become a real rage.
And a lot
I
of...
would say, as a Japanese person, magazines are still some of the big ways we get our information about hobbies from to this day.
And as a fan of Purores, I end up reading one particular magazine constantly, even if some of the people who write for it I don't agree with, and that's The Observer. And I know that you have full-on reporters still taking photos at things like the G1 events, or whatever event happens to happen at Cork and Hall. But the first appearances of Thieves' Rhapsody were in 1988, which was in Dragon Magazine in November. That was the Adventurer's Prelude. Later on, this would be titled The Cursed Underground Temple. Thieves' Rhapsody would be in February of the next year, and then subsequent adventures. This was supposed to be a one-off. Unfortunately for them, Thieves' Rhapsody got really popular, and there was a demand to make more replays. And
That's how unfortunate.
and the rules that were used were an extremely simplified version of what would become Sword World RPG. Because the request in the assignment was to have a game that even children could play. Which, as much as I enjoyed early D&D, I don't think I would put a kid in front of that, even though some of us did.
Or some of us were.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, everybody, I started playing TTRPGs at 4 years of age because the babysitter said, I'm going to pull out 2 Ys Fiend Folio. Here we go. To try and distract me. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah. But eventually the first core book for Sword World, which contained the rules for levels 1 through 5, would be published in 1989. And that was a collab of sorts between Hitoshi Yasuda and Miyuki Kiyomatsu. I also found out in the process of this that Kiyomatsu is a fan of American football.
Huh. That's pretty great.
Mm-hmm. But he is one of the founding members of Group SNE, and as mentioned, another graduate out of Kyoto University. Specifically, he came out of the SF study group of Kyoto University. Which I know some of you might say, why would a science fiction study group have anything in common with fantasy gaming?
I wonder why things of extremely fantastical and outlandish nature would have anything to do with each other. I can't imagine.
Another fun fact, that name Miyuki Kiyomatsu is a pen name. His real name was Yoshiyuki Kiyomatsu. But the reason why he didn't go with his real name is because people kept misreading his real name and thinking he was a woman.
That's like knowing a man named Ashley in modern day.
Or just Ash.
And I do know someone
Hail
named
to the
Ashley.
king, baby.
Yeah. Remember, folks, shop smart. Shop S-Smart. But after the immediate success of Sword World, which from what I've heard, Sword World was put in the same spots in bookstores that you would find, say, manga volumes or light novels. I think when we're in 1989 at this point, and I do think light novels were starting to catch on at that point in time.
And now they're everywhere with outlandishly long names.
And then there's Gaween Saga with outlandishly long amounts of volumes.
How's that outlandish? We just like a good story.
At least it's a good story that is going to some kind of conclusion. Looking at you, Detective Conan.
Mm,
We will be the writer for that will be dead and gone, and that story will still not be finished.
oh no, I'm sad. Why do you do this, monk? Why do you remind me of all the good lost souls?
Because God has punished me for my hubris, and my work is never finished.
One day I will find this god, and I will tell him that he is shit.
Yeah. But the other thing was the fact that once the game had come out, and as we stated before, uses a 2d6 approach and uses the classes as skill packages thing that we've talked about. Which before I get into that any further, I think we should take a bit of time to explain what is meant by this class as skills system. Which, Zan, would you mind being the evangelist for that?
Sure. So, in many ways, people, when they think of a class, they think of, and in many ways in the West, due to the ubiquitousness of the world's most litigious role-playing game, in many ways, when people think of a class, they think of a package that contains all the features, actions, and little special things that class can do. That it's a self-contained identity. In Sword World, what these classes instead do, sure, they give you access to some features, such as spell lists, but more often they enhance certain skills in the game that allow you to do specific things. It's not like your identity is tied to the class, because in this game, having multiple classes at different levels is actually preferable, as it enhances your overall ability to interact with the game world.
Mm-hmm.
So each class is not this self-contained thing that's going to be the only thing you follow. You are taking a class because you like what it gives you in terms of enhancing a specific part of your overall interactions with the world. For example, taking the Sage class gives you skills that help you to identify monster weaknesses and increase the loot you get from them. Taking any of the casting classes gets you access to their spells, along with things like metamagic feats and other caster-only features. And then, depending on which minor or major classes you have, will enhance how well you hit things, how well you cast magic, how well you have an initiative bonus. I mean, having Tactician gave John massive initiative bonuses.
Yeah. Now, I will note one major difference, because some of what you're referring to was applicable in the 2.0 era. I know. With 1.0, they were some of that is still applicable, but one of the big things is that major and minor classes did not exist. You had separate experience tracks for each individual class, and certain combinations could give you a cheaper version of that.
Yes, and I estimate that most people who are watching this or will watch this are going to be encountering mostly 2.5 in the wild, especially due to the translation efforts of 2.0 and 2.5, the official stuff that's coming out. So I was mostly addressing those. But yes, there are differences between 1.0 and 2, obviously. But the overall ethos of this idea is these are not an identity for your character. These are a package to help enhance the overall gameplay interactions of your character.
Mhm.
That's why we refer to them as skill packages, because it's not something that's going to pigeonhole you, it's something that's going to expand how you play.
Yep. Now, that being said, I know a lot of people have remarked about the D&D associations, especially in the 1.0 era, but I would like to posit something instead. The kind of world and the kind of rule set that we have with Sword World 1.0, the 2d6 part notwithstanding, is almost this happy medium of elements drawing some from D&D, but a lot more from RuneQuest.
I can see it.
Now, RuneQuest is a venerable entry, and one of the more unique entries that I'd like to see more people discuss, and I may discuss RuneQuest in detail at a later date. But a big reason why I bring up RuneQuest here is, with RuneQuest, there are two primary types of magic: spirit magic and rune magic. Within the original Sword World, you had different types of magic. Each of them using kanji that would refer to each of them as languages. And spellcasters are referred to as rune masters. And a big part of that is the three main playable casters in the traditional sense: sorcerer, shaman, priest. Sorcerer's magic system is referred to as High Ancient, or the Ancient Language. The shaman's approach is referred to as Silent Spirit, or the Spirit Language. Priest is Holy Prey, or the Holy Language. And you have a similar thing for dark magic and dragon magic, which are in the GM chapter because they are a little bit more advanced. And the dark magic is referred to as Demon Scream. Make of that what you will. But eventually, advanced rules for 1.0 would come about.
Demon's cream. That sounds weird.
I would say get out of the gutter, but you have layers of gutters, so I'm going to.
So
I was going to make the remark of you just had to go for the crude joke, but I should have expected this.
Monk, sheep are notoriously dirty animals.
This is fair, and I do have to correct myself. Dark magic and dragon magic were NPC-only classes.
Wouldn't that be white magic, though, if it's demon splooge?
Maki, go watch Legend of the Overlord again. Or Overfiend, excuse me. Legend of the Overfiend again. You should know that Demon Splooge is lightning bolts. It doesn't have a color. Also, Ethereal, you came into Maki being Maki and me being me.
You've been here quite a while. You should know better. But it does make perfect sense that a lot of early group S&E came from. Good.
He came into me. Question mark. Already. Not even a dinner first.
Oh, jeez.
Oh boy. It's
okay. Sorry. Continue.
So, yeah. But the thing is with the first book, which incidentally had a cover art by Amano, though from what I've heard, the sword image that he used was one that was originally was concept art for Final Fantasy II that didn't get used. But the first core book only covered levels 1 through 5. We would get later core books that would cover levels 6 through 10, as well as abilities, spells, and the like, and then eventually 10 through 15, as well as several optional rules. And a lot of this would be collected in the version of Sword World 1.0 that is translated, which is the Complete Edition. Complete Edition was a fusion of the original core book, the advanced core book, as well as notes that were collected in various issues of Dragon Magazine, as well as suggestions that were submitted by fans. And going back and reading the Complete Edition, it is very primitive, and it is written in a bit of a more technical style, which, given how it does its separation of parts, it is very let's just say it's not too much of a surprise that the people behind it were college graduates. Even in the translation, I can get that vibe. It's also in a 3-column format, which you don't see often, and for good reason. At least when it comes to, I mean, 3-column might work better in Japanese, but in English and a lot of European languages, a 3-column book is not very common. And if you're putting art in the book, it's even more, or any sort of diagrams, it's even more of a nightmare. That's why most people don't do it. But of course, you... Oh, good. Had to mute until I'm a little more composed from laughing too hard. However, even in the... And I do have to correct myself. In 1.0, the level cap was 10. But even in this early stage, you can see the DNA of some of their influences, and just as an example, I'm going to show you guys in the chat the chapter cover for chapter 8 within the core book.
Yep.
Look at this and tell me it does not have the DNA of a chapter in Traveler.
Yeah, it's pretty minimalist compared to some other games, kind of like Traveler's earlier books and later books. And why does Traveler sometimes read like a fucking auto manual?
Because Mark Miller.
I'm not getting into that.
Honestly, I'm actually more disturbed at the sheer amount of ink necessary to even create that much black to begin with.
Ah, but you forget, toner and laserjet printers even existed back then.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And it should be noted that even with the different skills as they were, you also had common abilities and a few other things. but as you get the advanced books, you don't with 1.0 you don't have a lot of rule expansions in books per se. What you mainly had was replays. Some of those replays would have little crunch bits in some parts, especially when it comes to the character sheets, because you've got to have those in a replay. But it was mostly replays and novels, as well as 3 video games. All 3 of them were based on existing novels. Sword World PC and Sword World SFC were based on the Island of the Dead Gods novel, which we may cover later on in this podcast. Obviously not today.
Not today, Satan.
Yep. I believe there was a different novel that was the focus for Sword World SFC 2, and obviously SFC is just short for Super Famicom. But more recently, SFC 1 and PC have gotten fan translations. Though in the case of PC, it is still a PC-98 game, so you are going to have some obstacles running that up in DOSBox X. As those of us who play a lot of old-school shooters have had to deal with, running DOSBox can be trying sometimes. Which is...
DOSBox is a character.
I mean, it does what it isn't. It is a decent emulator, but if people have the option to do it in something not that, they will take it.
Yes, they will.
Which is part of why I'm not so hard on remakes of old PC games that are using, say the Source engine. Especially since Night Dive has been doing the Lord's work and that kind of thing. But getting back to it. I'd say the closest to a rule expansion of sorts might have been things like support. I know there was that Q&A book but the Q&A was just that. It was a Q&A book. And things like Tour were, as well as the World Guide, were more about going into more detail on the setting of Alecrast. Which we will get into Alecrast in more detail on a future episode. But the Alecrast continent, which is where most of the adventures take place, is a more sword and sorcery type of feel. A lot of people have just said, "Oh, Alecrast is more traditional high fantasy." I don't think that's accurate. The kind of fantasy Alecrast has in common is pulp-style fantasy, sword and sorcery, with a bit of high fantasy.
So, I'm going to offend a lot of people saying it this way. It's like Lord of the Rings. And before anybody goes on my case and says, Lord of the Rings is high fantasy, follow the Fellowship. How many of them cast spells? How many of them use magic willy-nilly? Who's the most magical character in the Fellowship that's only there a third of the time? And how much magic does he actually use?
Pretty much.
The only reason Middle-earth itself is high fantasy is due to the world building Tolkien put into it. But the actual amount of high fantasy in this high fantasy world around the characters and the stories as you read them is actually rather small. It is much more a swords and sorcery affair in The Lord of the Rings, in The Hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
The most magical thing you see for a majority of the time are swords that glow around certain types of monsters and a ring that makes you invisible, except your soul is visible to the literal devil.
Mm-hmm.
It is much more swords and sorcery than it is high fantasy.
I know some people like to say that genre is just suggestions, which the only reason I don't agree with
taking our side.
My thing is though, if that when that's done, it's often done in a way to try and weasel out of the contradictions with certain things being labeled within genres.
Yes, whereas our position is genre has never been so strict, and we point to Japan endlessly about it.
However,
Maki should feel flattered that we point at her so much.
However, when it comes to genre, my approach has been
I am not flat, unfortunately. Very big boob.
I never said that you were flat, just flattered.
La 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 la. Not listening to this.
Also,
speak for yourself. I'm enjoying all of this.
Do I invoke one of the oldest rules of the internet now, Monk?
What?
Tits or gitfo?
Well, you've seen her design. I think we have that question answered.
I mean, you're not wrong.
I rarely am, and yet people are always surprised by it.
I was just going to ask, are they as fluffy as they're supposed to be, considering she's a sheep?
Yes.
Just going straight to it, I see.
Yeah. But even in the early days, there was one particular thing that was established very early on. And that is adventuring as a profession. I find it very amusing that this thing that people insist was established in the 90s and 2000s with video games, especially MMOs, has its origins much further back. In fact, a bit of a tangent warning, but somebody had made a comment in one group I was in, claiming that the quest board thing was something that was born out of MMOs and isekais. And I had brought up Fafhrd and Mauser had the Slayers Guild. And that was over 50 years ago. Like, there is even notes about adventurers guilds or an equivalent in the Unfinished Tales part of Middle-earth. Of course, some purists will argue about the canonicity of the Unfinished Tales because unfinished, but I'm like, if you wrote it and it is still referenced, I'm counting it. Plus, whenever people make Lord of the Rings RPGs, they bring up the Unfinished Tales or the Silmarillion, so I don't see why I can't. But now the full-on structure that we would see in 2.0 wasn't there yet, but the skeleton is still present.
Yes, I see.
And thank you for the sub, Riona. I see you're continuing your now 10-month streak. And I hope you enjoy the madness as we continue on this particular journey. But
one lewd mute VTuber subscribes to us, the other is a guest, of course.
Mm-hmm. If we had a
I'm now mute in stereo.
Mm-hmm. But
no escape.
And hey,
Also,
hello there.
Monk, as a side note about adventuring as a profession, I would like to point out we have that in real life. It's called archaeology.
That and the trade guilds going all the way back to medieval times.
Yes.
Like,
Trade guild is probably the reason why America was discovered to begin with.
that's a different rabbit hole, and I don't feel like getting lost in the forest of all knowledge for that yet.
Yeah, we are trying to remain on one branch of Yggdrasil right now. We're not trying to go to Mimir's Brunner and sacrifice an eye for all knowledge.
However, when it comes getting back to the matter at hand, and this is the reason why I brought up RuneQuest when I was saying that there's some DNA of that. RuneQuest is not your typical high fantasy. RuneQuest's particular world has far more in common with Bronze Age and Mediterranean style mythos, especially if you look at some of the art from RuneQuest. And well, the fact that part of its magic is runes, as mentioned before. Magic in RuneQuest is either spirit magic or rune magic. And with rune magic, you are acting on behalf of a god. So once again, we have a case of magic is always divine, which I like. But just to give an example, here is one of the old cover arts. I'm going to share it with you guys in the Sacricity chat. Yeah, the visual style of Glorantha is very antiquity.
Antiquity of all types too. We see some Viking inspirations. We definitely see some Middle Europe inspirations, and we even see some Aztec inspirations. Look, it's a little bit of Chinese too. Great.
Very nice. I do like this visual style.
Yeah. And some of that has to do with Stafford and the fact that he was a legit shaman back in his day. But a big reason I bring that kind of thing up is that's the kind of style that I see. I see RuneQuest as leaning into not RuneQuest, Sword World 1.0 leaning into far more than, say, D&D. And to illustrate that, I did have a folder set up of just a bunch of art I grabbed from different PDFs within the series. And let me give one example. This is the cover art for Island of the Dead Gods.
I like it.
Let's just look at this for a second and see once again how many mishmash inspirations there are. There's quite a few. We love it. We love to see it. And we also love to see flying islands, because floating islands aren't used in enough fantasy, I swear to fucking God.
Ain't it the truth?
And this art style is so much better than a good chunk of what comes out as art nowadays.
I'm not going to get into the old versus new debates. We've covered that in the past and how we feel on that matter. But the point is something to note with the early founders is the fact that a lot of them were either game designers outright or were fiction writers. And I think that establishes a very clear a very clear foundation as to why you have this much different approach. You didn't have people who were trying to recreate historical battles. As I mentioned, the wargaming scene never really stuck around in Japan. And
I mean, I think part of that is space. Wargaming tends to take up a lot of space, and in Japan, that's kind of at a premium.
I'd say the other issue is a lot of the early pioneers when it came to RPGs in the US. They certainly came from that college crew, but they, instead of coming from fiction, like science fiction study groups or something like that, it was from historical reenactment studies. Remember, there were a lot of those World War I, II, and pike and shot simulation war games back in the early 70s.
Mm.
And that sort of thing plays a factor. Plus, we're starting to see that nowadays, where you have more people who have a background in fiction writing or straight up game design than in trying to do historical verisimilitude. Nothing wrong with that. It's just an observation of the kinds of people that have gotten into game design over the years.
Well, and as we continue to say, even as the naysayers say it's bad, is that people are always going to put parts of themselves into what they're creating, especially the inspirations that brought them to that creative point in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why we see, again, going back to the world's most litigious role-playing game, the presence of so many classical fantasy authors and pulp fantasy authors of the time. It's just all over, stamped on the earliest days of D&D. But as that evolved, as people came in, we saw more people leaning towards the newer things they were interested in. And even with Group SNE, the inspirations that were listed earlier regarding their earliest stuff in Sword World, a lot of those are classical fantasy authors that we saw alongside the same stuff in D&D, just expressed in a different fashion.
Mm-hmm.
The expansion of creativity due to inspiration from is just part of life, part of how people grow. When people talk about standing on the shoulders of giants, I don't think they realize that those giants are standing on the shoulders of those who came before them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So this expansion, this constant elevation, is just because people come in inspired to do so.
Yeah. But a lot of the Sword World books in the 1.0 era were largely built around novels and replays, as mentioned. And some of those we do have translated. Things like The Island of the Dead God, or The Freeman's Sorrow. Or, which I think it was The Freeman's Sorrow that was used for SFC2. Don't quote me on that. But also a collection of short stories. And a lot of these stories that were written by one Ryo Mizuno, the writer of Record of Lodos War. Despite what that one video from William SRD had stated, Lodos did not become Sword World. Lodos was doing its own thing for a while and then got integrated in the late 90s. And I should note that the 90s as a whole was kind of a golden age for TTRPGs in Japan when it came to a lot of people delving into it. And one of the other reasons Sword World was made was Kadokawa was already putting out a gaming magazine, and they wanted their own game to promote. Zan, why does that story sound so familiar?
I can't imagine why, Monk. It's on the tip of my tongue.
For those who haven't studied their history, that was one of the multitude of reasons why Dragon Quest became a thing. And a magazine having their own game to promote in it isn't anything new. There were plenty of computer gaming magazines that did that back in the day, and that's how we got a lot of shareware stuff back in the 90s. And Zan, Sig, I'm pretty sure you had played a few shareware versions of some boom shoots.
Oh, absolutely.
Shareware, I actually think I had the floppies for all the boomer shooters that I had early days. But I also remember running Doom and Wolfenstein 3D on my computer before I properly had Windows 3.1, and thus had to actually use the command line interface to log in to boot up those games.
Mm-hmm.
I still remember.
Oh, go ahead.
I still remember Wolfenstein 3D just being that thing that I was terrible at back in the day.
Don't feel bad. Even pros are terrible at it.
The only shareware game I remember playing growing up was actually Duke Nukem 2.
Yeah, which Duke Nukem 2 was, if you didn't have something like Contra or Turrican, Duke Nukem 2 was the closest you were going to get.
Mm-hmm. And it was glorious.
As well as another example of Lee Jackson ripping off metal bands he's heard. Don't feel bad about me making that joke. Everybody does it.
But enough about Bobby Prince.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Bobby Prince as well. It was a thing, and hell, even Jimmy Hart was doing it in WCW. So precedent. But eventually problems started to occur because by the time we get to around 1997, TCGs start hitting the market. And one of them was produced by Katakawa, and that was Monster Collection. And it was far more profitable than RPGs were, and thus it was getting a lot more of the attention, a lot more budget. And it was basically eating everybody's lunch. Up until 2003, where all of a sudden that momentum for TCGs just died. And there's been some interviews going into what happened around that time, and even Katakawa doesn't know what exactly happened. Just all of a sudden, the demand for card games just died off, and a set that was planned was scrapped. If I had to venture a guess, and this is me spitballing, I think it was a case of too much too soon. And you know me, whenever it comes to looking at these kind of things, I try and draw parallels. And the parallel that immediately comes to mind for me was the state of Purores in the early 2000s. Especially in, say, 2003 to 2005, where MMA was really eating everybody's lunch. Especially promotions like K1 and Pride. And then it suddenly died because of the Dreamstage scandal.
Oh boy.
There's a lot more I could get into, but basically Dreamstage was taking money from people they shouldn't. It resulted in a it resulted in a massive scandal, and Fuji TV, who was handling their pay-per-views, all of a sudden pulled out and said that they would never promote any event that had their banner. And while Pride and Hustle and a few other things stuck around for a few years, everybody knew they were on death's door. It was just a matter of time. Kim Justice has done a good video on the matter, and in that the analogy was made to being lung shot. You're conscious, but you know you are rapidly running out of time, and there is nothing you can do about it. Now, Sword World did attempt to try and keep up. There was the Sword World card project in the early 2000s. I think it was in 2003 that tried to do a box set that did the rules of Sword World, but as cards. I was sent a few examples of those thanks to Awkward, who once again has been doing the Lord's work.
Hasn't he been for a while though?
Yeah, but especially when it comes to answering the dumb questions from me.
Mm-hmm.
But I shouldn't. And looking back at the timeline, there between the advanced rules and the complete edition, there was a gap of about 6 years. In between that was two of the major world guides. There was the World Guide itself and the Western Countries World Guide, also known as the 10 Children. In 1998, there was the Lodos World Guide, because Lodos Companion was starting to flag due to the TCG thing, but Sword World was still keeping some momentum. Then there wasn't a whole lot until the early 2000s, where you get things like Sword World Basic and Sword World Card, as well as a few modules and the tour books, which is a concept we would see later. But it had gotten bad enough that one of the magazines that was covering RPGs got folded and transformed into a card game magazine. Especially since, well, one of the games that was really taking off was Magic the Gathering. But that is an example of the Sword World card project. Just a few cards there, and if you want more, you can always Google this. Just go through a Google image search, and you'll easily find a few. So yeah, there was Sword World Card RPG, which, if somebody ever tries to translate some of those cards, I would like to take a look, because I do think cards and RPGs still has a lot of potential to be explored. And it is kind of funny that was explored all the way back in the early 2000s. But and is anyone familiar with a card game called Warlord?
Sounds familiar.
Yep. Warlord was a card game that was heavily based on...
There's also that one magical girl card fighting TRPG now that I think about it.
If you can find me some more details down the road, that would be much appreciated, since I do a lot of research, but I can only do so much. And let me give you one more image for good measure. With a few familiar faces.
Speak. I'll link in the meantime.
Because obviously, with some of the novels, one of the novels that came around was the Rune Soldier novels, which were basically light novels to promote Sword World. Yes, it eventually got an anime, but that's another matter entirely. But even when TCGs started to lose some of that momentum, RPGs didn't fully recover. And by the time we get to the mid to later 2000s, there seemed to be a mindset of Alecrest has been around too long, and 1.0 stopped being supported in 2007. And oh yeah, Princess Wing. I'm familiar with Princess Wing. I have the translation for that. That was the game that Maki was referring to earlier, folks.
Mhm.
But one day I probably will do a deep dive on that, as well as stuff like Scrapped Princess and Dragon Half, both of which use the 2d6 system but otherwise have very little in common. And the Dragon Half RPG is a shitpost. It calls itself a silly RPG, but it has more in common with Munchkin than anything else. As one would expect, because it's Dragon Half.
Dragon Half will never not have a song stuck in my head. It's all the fault of my friends from high school.
Hmm.
I haven't seen Dragon Half in forever.
Same.
But you also haven't heard the song in forever then, but it's stuck in my head for eternity.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a personal problem.
I don't think of it as a problem. I think of it as a solution.
Fair.
But the song is called Watashi no Tamagoyaki.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great because I do remember the song. Basically, it's great.
Oh yeah.
But there's a lot of things Group SNE has done,
Mm-hmm.
as we have just demonstrated,
Yeah, and one of
that
the
infect pop culture.
Mm-hmm. There was also a project called Okahoshin RPG that is more Chinese fantasy taking place that I'd like to look at in more detail in the future. As well as things like the hyper tunnels and trolls, which I'd venture a guess that going D6 based for Sword World was an indirect nod to that, since hyper tunnels and trolls did hit store shelves in the mid '80s, but as we get into the late 2000s, there were several attempts to try and get some more eyes on Sword World, whether it be the card RPG or a relaunched basic set called Sword World Basic. These had mixed results, but the repeated attempts did result in the chain of events that would lead to the foundation of a new tabletop magazine called Roll and Roll. That magazine is still up to this day, last we checked. And I'm going to put in the chat how it was spelled.
I mean, considering it's a set of homophones, I can imagine.
Mm-hmm. But it's still getting updates. I personally found out about it when I was doing research on Shadowrun's run in Japan, and how very different it is from the stateside version. This was back when Group SNE had a working relationship with FASA, which is how they got stuff like BattleTech, Earth Dawn, and Shadowrun. as well as the Shadowrun Mega CD game, which was one of the last Mega CD games to ever release. I think some people have said it is the last. But eventually the decision was made that Sword World needed to evolve, and when we get to 2008, that was when we saw the first release of 2.0. And as far as the question of why they went with a whole new setting and a whole new everything with 2.0, the vibe that I get from some of the interviews was they had done everything that they could possibly do with Alecrast. And if Sword World was going to continue, it needed a new start. Plus, the 2.0 was meant to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Sword World. Which was why it came out in 2012. This is where we have the post-apocalypse kind of world that was forged by the Swords of Genesis that we are all familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the big things that was a major shift was the two individuals I mentioned before that were a lot of the front runners. They started to step back. Ryo Mizuno would stay around, but he largely became more of a consultant. The person who would become the guy in the 2.0 era is Kei Kitazawa.
Yep.
Kei Kitazawa was a longtime player and had worked on a few small things here and there during the 1.0 era. But it was decided to have him as the 2.0 guy to inject some fresh blood into the conversation. I think the mindset was the vision of the 1.0 guys had gone as far as it would go. We need something new that is not going to be looked at as just more of 1.0 but in a different coat of paint. In the process, he has indirectly answered why I don't get on with so many retro clones in the tabletop space. Or to put it another way, if you are doing a throwback shooter, and you are doing demon killing in a tech base, as Civi had said, a pox on your fucking house.
A pox on thee.
And so I'll briefly touch on this, but a lot of retro clones put me to sleep because a cleaned up version of AD&D does not interest me. And what I feel like with what was attempted with 2.0 was use what they already had, but do so in a way that wasn't going to be confused with the style of fantasy that was in Alecrast. Though they did make clear in interviews, there's nothing stopping you from using the new rules in Alecrast. And I think there's been a few fan-made supplements focused on that. I know that Awkward and Company did that with a companion to Sword World PC that they had written about doing Alecrast in the 2.0 rules. But the class setup vastly expanded. The experience setup for classes was simplified into what we see now with the major and minor, as well as organizing classes into various types. the types were organized in those categories kind of in 1.0, but they weren't given proper names at the time. And of course, the big thing that was expanded was the introduction of Magitech, as well as the introduction of Fairy Tamers, which is it's funny to look at Fairy Tamer in the interviews where they compare it to summoners in old Final Fantasy games. Although, if I'm being honest, a Fairy Tamer is nowhere near as powerful as, say, Rydia in 4.
A fairy tamer is nowhere near as powerful as anyone who has access to black magic and
Oh, absolutely not.
But I can see the intent.
Yes.
And some of the other thing that did happen was certain classes that were standalone got split, and other ones were just reworked entirely. Sage got massive overhauls because Sage was kind of the redheaded stepchild in 1.0. It was useful, but very situational.
So they just made it useful all the time.
Yeah, and it was mostly a skill monkey job, but it didn't. And actually, just to make sure I'm not talking about it my ass, let me grab the entry in Complete Edition and look at Sage. So players section, and of course you did have the character. Okay, Sage. Sage had the monster check, but the thing about the monster check in 1.0 from 2.0, it was just check to see if you know what the monster is. The idea of checking for weak points didn't happen yet.
Yep, that wasn't until 2.
Mm-hmm. But languages was still there, as well as the division of speaking and reading languages, except for runes. Astrology was a skill you could do, which I feel like that got moved into other classes, as well as knowledge, which was do you know something or not? You know, research, treasure appraisal, medicines. I feel like that would be shifted over into the ranger in 2.0. But you can see there's a lot of stuff that is useful and does the academic vibe. But
yep,
given the price of the class at the time. Oh yeah, and there was also the fact that you had to spend experience points to increase ability scores instead of the growth system you see in 2.0. But the main reason you would pick Sage was that it allowed you to pick casting classes at cheaper. And amusingly enough, Sorcerer was the most expensive class to do. Just kind of weird. But 2.0, there was a lot of an attempt to streamline. And I realize streamlining is a dirty word, especially given its abuse in video games. But in this case, there was a lot of attempts to try and pare down some of the more crunchy bits and make it more accessible. And if I'm being honest, I do consider 2.0 to be more accessible than 1.0 was.
2.0 is also more expansive in a lot of ways. It just does more. It took what 1.0 did, refined what it could, trimmed the fat, and then added on so much more.
Mm-hmm. And just the races alone, when you get to 2.0, is a lot more. The races in 1.0 were dwarf, grass runner, elf, half elf, and changeling. If you did, obviously humans as well. But of course, you have even with the core rulebook 1 for Sword World 1, you had a lot more to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So you could say it's a case of taking what worked and just expanding on it in every direction.
Like I said, they refined what they had, trimmed the fat, and then just piled on more.
Eventually, the 2.0 rulebooks would be revised in 2012, and then in 2018 you get 2.5. But from 2.0 onward, you start to have a much more consistent release pattern as opposed to what you saw in 1.0, where it was a few core books and a lot of fiction.
Yeah. With 2.0 and then later 2.5, what we saw was they would release different types of supplemental material in a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
You get things like the world guides, which were guides to certain regions within the New World, because 2.0 does take place in Raxia, a different world entirely.
Yes.
And you'd have those world guides. You'd have supplements and modules that would come in, little adventure modules that people could play. You'd also have things that would be spotlights on new mechanics or character classes they were introducing.
Mm-hmm. And you can put a lot of the releases into 3 categories. You had the core books, which there were 3 of them, and did that same level gap approach we mentioned before. Rulebook 1 covered levels 1 through 5. 2, which would come out 2 months later, did levels 7 through 10, and 3 would be 11 through 15. And while that may not sound like a lot, keep in mind that your adventurer level is just the level up that you have the most, class that you have the most levels in. So even with the range of say 1 to 5, there's a lot of varieties you can do with that. It also makes looking at adventure level as an overall power grade of a character kind of tricky to do. Not that you and I would know a thing or two about that, Zan.
Not at all. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and Riona brings up the kobolds, which are locked at adventure level 5, but the work skills that were in Raxia Life are exempt from that limitation. Which, as an aside, I enjoy kobolds as doggos more than the dog-faced lizards in the original monster manuals.
Kobolds as dog people is one of the best things Japan has done with fantasy.
Mm-hmm. But
I mean, there's a lot of good things Japan has done with fantasy, but since I get to say it, I'm just gonna say one of the best things: doggo people.
Yeah.
And anybody who watches Dungeon Meshi knows the kobolds are best boys and girls.
Mm-hmm. But The next year, this particular pattern would start with stuff like Alchemist Works, which introduced the Alchemist class, and which I kind of ripped off when I did the item synthesis system for Legend Edition. But and of course the world books, which you would see the tour series in 2.0 early on, but that was only for about 2 years and only 2 books: Tour Luferia and Tour Leos. Later on, the world books would have the title Natural History of, with the exception of Procelsia, but that's a world book and a module. And of course, in addition to all of that, you had the campaign books. And not all of the campaign books have come out. One that I really hope we do get that came out in 2011 is Eternal Empire. I hope to see that translated at some point in the future. But the fun thing when it comes to the modules is the modules themselves feel like an expansion episode for an FPS. They have their own little world that they inhabit and their own set of rules that is exclusive to that module.
Legacy of Rust.
Yeah, Legacy of Rust. I love me the Calamity Blade.
Good weapon. Good weapon.
Not so.
This isn't the proper time for me to bring up Plutonia Project then.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck off!
For once, I'm not the one saying it.
Still don't hate it as much as TNT.
Although it was funny seeing Kasali lose his damn mind playing TNT. And he worked on it, and he's like, how did this suck so much?
Also, I'm glad that I could offer you a view on the other side of the one-way mirror there, Monk. I'm sure you're only used to seeing the reflection.
Yeah. But Eternal Empire is about building your own country, and this sort of thing of a rule supplement, a setting supplement, and a campaign book would be a consistent cycle over the next few years. There was one event that I've heard didn't get received all that well that is a special case, and that was the Dragon Raid event. Now, the only version of Dragon Raid I have is the compilation that came out after it was done, but it was as I understand it, Dragon Raid was an attempt to do this public event among tables. Something kind of like the Kotai tournaments that L5R did, or the infamous Storm of Chaos event that Warhammer Fantasy did.
I claim no responsibility for that Storm of Chaos. I might be Chaos Incarnate, but that was just a clusterfuck. That ain't my brand of chaos.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose I could also liken it to some of the social events that games like Pokemon were doing in the 90s. That's based on what I've heard regarding Dragon Raid. The idea is it was an event that people could join in on and send reports to,
yeah.
and their progress would be tracked.
I'm actually really happy that the 3 different book types were being released in a very regular cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And that cycle was so regular that Awkward in the translation group actually made a graphic in the shared Google Drive folders that showed the release schedule for these 3 supplement types and how their translation group was translating behind it. It was like, this is so regular, they can keep up.
Mm-hmm.
It's an amazing thing.
And I know that even with what happened recently, some of these stuff is still going to be translated. But I do want to highlight the campaign books just to illustrate what I mean by every one of them feeling different. You look at a campaign book in most games, and it's going to be using more or less the same rules as the core material. It's just going to be a different flavor of dungeon in some cases. But here,
I mean, Monkey, we only have to point at Mist Castle and Demon's Line.
So let me go into several of these. At least the ones that I can access. Mist Castle, which was apparently a rush job and also the darkest module and the first one. Like, you guys really hit the ground running with that.
It's a dark module rush job roguelike. Let's not forget that it is a randomly generated dungeon.
Mm-hmm. And it did introduce me to something I've since heard referred to as point crawl by our good friend Alex T. Because you are building the map as you go through these different sections.
I think they felt frisky.
Ha!
So they made it.
But apparently Mist Castle was made under a very tight deadline. Which is incredible to me, given what we saw out of it. But the concept would get a lighter take a year later with Fairy Garden. Fairy Garden is, well, if you're gonna have fairy magic in the game, you're gonna have the land of fairies. And this idea of you have to carefully manage how much time you spend in Fairyland, because if you spend too much time in, it's hard to come back out.
So normal fairy court rules, got it.
Yep.
Anybody who's worth their salt that knows their Celtic folklore knows. Don't spend too much time on the other side, and don't eat anything, or you're trapped there forever.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry, Oberon and Titania will take good care of you until they're bored and don't care anymore.
Yeah. Apparently there was a sequel to Mist Castle called Mist Grave, but that hasn't been translated yet. In fact, that was the only one that didn't get translated. Or not the only one that got a sequel. Everything else is largely standalone. But Magitech Angel of Kar-Zoral, which may get translated in the future, is about the Kar-Zoral region and traveling with an NPC that you have to keep an eye on. Procelsia did a similar thing with a girl who has the soul of a dragon. As well as going into the Procelsia region, which has a very unique relationship with dragons. To the point where they have a more harmonious relationship until a certain star happens to cross by, and then dark dragons start showing up and things get chaotic.
See, that's my brand of chaos.
Mm-hmm. But then you have things like World Odyssey, which World Odyssey is a interesting beast. It involves going up a tower where there are different spaces and times throughout history on it. More recently, there was Endless Maze, which is its own module, but also has an extensive dungeon generation rules. And Sword World has I'd say far more legitimate reasons for its dungeons than one would expect from other fantasy games. And there are
Bubble
two
worlds and...
Yes. You have the bubble
And,
worlds,
shallow
which
abysses.
which is a more recent thing. You have the sword labyrinths, which are miniature dimensions in of themselves, created by a magic sword. Not a sword of Genesis, mind you. Nobody's seen them for centuries.
No, they've only seen one sort of Genesis over the centuries, Monk, and those are the sword shards you keep picking up.
Yep. What's left over of Cardia.
Yeah. With as many shards as you can collect throughout all the modules, I'm surprised they just haven't rebuilt the sword.
But then you had a scenario collection in the Terrassier Adventure records, and a lot of scenarios as opposed to full campaigns are very small. They're akin to like the one-page adventures that you see from Savage World. But crunch-wise, if I've seen some people go, why did 2.5 need to happen? If I'm being honest, it needed to happen because of where things were when it came to Sword World by the time we get to 2019. And even 2018. Because through several of the expansions, like Cardia Grace, Lumiere Legacy, and Ignis Blaze, as well as things like Wizard's Tome and the like, there was a lot of stuff that had gotten repeated, and a lot of alternate cases of different classes. For example, originally, Fairy Tamer was a standard class list, like standard spell list. Why do I keep screwing up words today? Much like sorcerer or shaman. Later on is where we get the track system that Fairy Tamer would use and would be canonized in 2.5. Which, Zam, would you mind going into that track system and why it's more on elemental ranks?
So, the way Fairy Tamer works with 2.5 is they have access to one spell per level, depending on what fairies they are using that day. They can have up to 4 fairies active at any one time in their magic gem, using 4 magics active, I should say, at any time, depending on what gems they have in use in their gem cases. But they have access to 8 elemental lists. This technically means they actually get more spells than any other casting class in the game per level, because that means it's access to 8 spells per level, compared to Sorcerer, which has anywhere between 4 to 3 to sometimes even only 2, depending on how high in the level you get per level. The only limitation is, what 4 gems am I going to have active at the beginning of the day? And you get to choose those 4 gems, which are your 4 elements for the day.
Yeah. We didn't start seeing that until some of the expansions, and in the same vein, Shaman would get golems, which would become canon, and Sorcerer would get familiars. You start seeing other spellcasting classes. And
not that I ever used a familiar, because it was just more useful for me to chop things and then zap them.
If I may say,
good.
From my own perspective, who sort of was active in the TRPG community around 2018 as well, I can say also another bit. There is definitely a huge bloat of information, and a lot of things that needed refining and re-evaluating. So they approached this fresh new look on a fresh new continent with a refreshed perspective. So while there are a fair bit of books for 2.5, they are often very concise comparatively speaking. It's a different approach to book writing.
Yeah, there was also the fact that a lot of stuff got repeated in books. That was something I noticed that was annoying the hell out of me. It was like, I know this is a brand new book, but do you need to have all of the spells that were in Core Rulebook 1 in Wizard's Tome? Is that really necessary?
and essentially, like what Maki said, them taking the time to reevaluate and revise how they write was necessary, which is a sign of a good development and editing team. Straight up.
But
taking the time to take a look at something and go, hey, we can condense this information and expand upon it, and also make sure that there's not a lot of bloat.
But I think the case in point when it comes to the bloat thing that Maki's bringing up is the mere existence of Core Rulebook EX. This came out in 2015, so a little bit of time after the revised Core Rulebooks came out. I would describe EX as akin to Unearthed Arcana. And for the longest time, the way you'd bring people in was Core Rulebook 1 and EX. It contained sampler versions of some of the expanded material that was in things like Lumiere Legacy, Cardia Grace, Ignis Blaze, as well as things like Wizard's Tome and Alchemist Works. Magitech also got this whole alternate thing with the introduction of Magispheres, as well as being able to use certain materials to customize spells. The latter thing didn't survive 2.5, and I think it's because you have to answer the question of why is that necessary when metamagic feats are a thing?
Yep.
Now the Magisphere thing that capped because every single casting archetype has some sort of catalyst that they need to have on hand. Sorcerer and Shaman have magic implements, though if you want to spend a few gamma, you can turn a weapon into a magic implement. Looking at you, Zan.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about at all.
Yep. Or on the other hand, you have the fact that Magitech would need a Magisphere, which was always a thing, but later on you start to have required Magispheres for different sizes.
Just remember that Neff's favorite spell early on is a bomb that blows open doors.
Yeah. And I guess I'd say Magispheres are, and we'll get into that when we get into more detail on the 2.0 and 2.5 classes next year. But
yep.
A Magisphere, I'd liken it to, say, the Guardian in Destiny. Or not the Guardian, Ghost in Destiny.
Ghost.
Or the Mags in Phantasy Star Online. Just without the photon burst.
Yep.
In the sense of being the support thing that you utilize. Of course, the Magispheres aren't why somebody takes Artificer to get access to the Magitech spell list. It's for the guns. But
Muriker.
Mm-hmm.
Eagle Screech.
And even, like, for example, Ignis Blaze had these expanded versions of all of the combat feats. So by the time we get to 2018, you have this problem of essentially two versions of Sword World existing. This basic and this expanded version without a real line of separation. So the fat needed to be trimmed. And when we get to 2.5, that fat would be trimmed. The core rulebooks for that came out in 2019. Or not, 2018, I should say. Core rulebook 1 came in July 2018. Then 2 in September. And then Core Rulebook 3 in January of the next year.
Yes.
But
good stuff.
a lead in to that was a couple things. One, a one-shot module that we ended up running called Journey to the Continent of Allflame. That did not appear in any book. It was in It was in the Game Master magazine, or Game Mastery. And it was essentially meant to be a lead-in for adventures going from Terrastier, which was the continent focused on in 2.0, to Allflame, which is the continent in 2.5. And one of the really big things that was introduced in 2.5 was trains. And you have no idea how funny it is whenever I see Grog say that trains don't have no place in a fantasy setting.
Laughs and trails of cold steel.
I just go laughs in Wild Arms. And then they get pissed at me again because I'm bringing up a console RPG, which is apparently heretical.
Laughs in Final Fantasy.
Yeah. But a big reason for the train thing was to give more of a reason to explore further afield for adventurers. But in addition to that, one of the other major things that was introduced, and if I can get the chance to interview somebody who can explain why this thing was put in beyond what I have been able to find so far, I'd like to do that. And that is fellows. And Sam, would you mind being the evangelist on what fellows are?
Fellows are an interesting and fun little mechanic in 2.5 that allow you to have miniature, semi-AI, semi-automatically driven guest characters. You can take an actual created character and turn them into a fellow, or you can just create a fellow from scratch. And they act at the end of the initiative order in combat. They're just little helpers, essentially. Like I said, a guest NPC into the game.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the coolest things that was advertised about them is, hey, one of your friends can't make it to a session one week. Say that your fellow version of their actual character shares experience and items so that the fellow can go along with you and still get a share in loot and XP, so that when your friend comes back next week, they're not behind. It is such a fun mechanic, and I am so glad they made it.
Yep. Now, in addition to that, this is where we also start seeing the early forms of things like work skills and properly refining the three types of combat. There is simplified combat, which only is concerned with a front line and a shared front line and a rear guard for both allies and enemies. Standard combat, which has been described as akin to a fighting game, but I've maintained that a better analogy is the Tales of series during the 2D era. And advanced combat, which is full range. But I need to make this clear, advanced combat is not, I repeat, not grid combat. It has
none of the forms of combat are grid.
Advanced combat uses full circles in a manner not far removed from a war game, or from certain RTS RPG hybrid like Spellforce. Good game series, by the way. More people should try Spellforce. It is a unholy union of a RTS and an RPG. But eventually more material does come out, and it is still kind of going in that same circle. The most recent release, which brings us to the present day, is Core Rulebook DX, which is doing what Complete Edition in 1.0 was, just in 2.5. And that is the version that will be getting a official translation and a Kickstarter for that official translation next year. But in the interim, there's been a few other things. I already mentioned Vice City, which came out in April 2019, and it also was a roguelike of sorts. You were building the Vice City square by square. It was also, I'd say it was also one of 2.5's early introductions to demons. Because demons are tied to the Warlock class, which was the one class I banned anyone from using during the Magic Railroad campaign last year. The reason for it is Warlock is a demonologist, and its mechanics are a bit complicated. Not impossible to go through, but it's a higher floor.
It's a higher floor, and the only person on hand who had enough familiarity with Sword World to try and run it other than you would have been me.
Mm-hmm.
And while it would have been cool if Arya had been a warlock instead of a sorcerer, at that point, I'm just Reaper from Final Fantasy XIV.
No, if I'm being honest, if I had access to it, I would have suggested you take either Dark Hunter or Abyss Gazer. But the book that they were in, Abyss Breaker, wouldn't have come out for a while.
Yeah. But the point is that, excluding something that has a high floor to start with,
mm-hmm.
because most of the people in the group were not familiar with Sword World, was a good call.
Yeah. But some classes have made the jump back into 2.5, but there have been a few in 2.0 that haven't. Everything that was in Age of Grimoire hasn't made the jump, which is unfortunate since there's some very interesting classes. And also the everything that was in Fortuna Code, which is basically the epic rules. And it very much is apropos.
Yep.
Because Fortuna is the fabled fourth sword of Genesis. But how much of it actually exists and how much is conjecture is left up to interpretation.
That's up to the players.
There's a heavy implication that the fourth sword, Fortuna, shows up in certain moments and then disappears.
Yep.
But within 2.5, we also saw more experiments to try and to allow for GM-less stuff, or even solo things. Like in 2022 when Duo Adventure came out. Which was a self-contained thing where you were playing as the companion to a prince or princess. And obviously, last year, we start getting things like the Bubble World. And hello there. Bubble Worlds I've described as what Total War Sagas was supposed to be. They are a micro-dimension with their own rules. And have their own sets of mechanics and their own settings that are separate from Raxia. The first one was Monochromatica, which is a horror affair, where the natural world is black and white and color is treated as divine and also a bad omen. And introduced a kind of grid combat, but not in the way one might think. And it's one that's tailor-built for Monochromatica, so you could take it and put it in a Raxia campaign, but you'd have to do some work. And then earlier this year, there was Tales of the Dragon's Remains Blade, which is a full-on feudal Japan style setting. And
we like to have Sengoku Jidai and everything. Isn't that right, Maki?
But that more
Yes.
that more or less covers things when it comes to the history. And there's a lot of books and the like that I skimmed. Some of it hasn't been translated, and some of it I want to focus on doing deep dives with in the coming months. But with that said, as we go into the history, before we go into what we're gonna be covering in 2 weeks, what did you guys think of this little trip down memory lane? Any questions on that? Any things to clarify? Any observations? Any P's and Q's?
No, this was a great introduction. I'm just glad to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in the end, there's a lot to cover when considering the history of Sword World, simply because it really does revolve around the core of what made Group SNE arise in the first place. You can't really explore the history of Sword World without exploring the outside factors to Group SNE. And I'm glad we were able to touch on those.
Mm-hmm. Now, with that in mind, this is going to be the last time for a while that we'll be tackling anything 2.0 or 2.5 related. Because the episodes for the next few months, going all the way to the end of 2025, are going to be largely focused on 1.0. Part of the reason I did that is there's less ground to cover, as mentioned previously, but also I wanted to set a tone. In order to tackle where we are now, it's important to see how we got here.
History is important.
Mm-hmm.
And next week we'll be talking about the Aelcras continent, both its western and eastern side, meaning we will be covering the 10 children as well. And
It'll be a high-level overview, though.
Yeah. And we'll also be talking about the many, 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 many adventures of one Louis the Rune Soldier.
Yep.
Those of you who think you might know from the anime, you only have the tip of the iceberg, my friends.
Oh, goodness.
Laughs in novelization.
Strap yourselves in. We're in for the long haul.
Yep.
Yes.
We'll probably also talk a little bit about the 3 arcs when it comes to Lodos. In a broad sense, because we will be going into far more detail with those areas in the coming episodes. But
Indeed.
with that said, that is going to be more or less a wrap for this particular episode.
All right.
Remember before that, I will note next week Zan and I will be returning with Fated Continuum, going over Final Fantasy III within Legend Edition, as well as going over the submissions we got for the September Design Challenge.
Yes. Excellent. But with all of that being said, everybody, thank you once again for coming to our little chronicle of these Sword Forged Worlds. May your adventures be grand and your treasures myriad. We will see you here again in 2 weeks.
Stay frosty.
See you on the trail.
我所